The evening had fallen slowly, almost lazily, over our quiet neighborhood. The air was cool, but not cold, just perfect for a relaxing evening with the family. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the streets, everything seemed still. The kind of stillness that would make you think nothing could ever break it. My wife, Laura, sat on the front porch, her legs stretched out in front of her as she sipped a glass of sweet tea, her eyes half closed as she basked in the last remnants of the day's warmth. My daughter, Emily, was on the lawn, her little wheelchair parked just beside her. Her face lit up with a genuine smile as she watched a neighbor's dog prance around her. The world was perfect in those moments, small, quiet, and so full of love. Laura had always been the rock of our family, the one who made everything feel safe and whole. She was the kind of person who could light up a room without even trying, with her laughter that filled the house and a heart too big for anyone to ignore. And Emily, despite the challenges she faced every day with her disability, had that same light. Watching the two of them together always made me feel like the luckiest man alive. My daughter, with her soft giggles and boundless energy, never let her condition define her. She was a fighter. She was strength. The neighborhood we lived in, though, was another part of that perfect picture. A place where everyone knew everyone, where the streets were lined with tidy homes, the kind of community you imagine when you think of suburban America. People waved as they drove by, greeted each other at the mailbox, and shared polite conversations about the weather. At least, that was the illusion, the one everyone chose to see. But in reality, like in every seemingly peaceful place, there were cracks beneath the surface, hidden tensions, unspoken grudges, and a presence that could turn the entire tranquility upside down. We had never really noticed it before, the tension. It was easy to ignore when everything around you felt perfect. But over time, there was a certain sense of discomfort that began to creep into our lives, a quiet undercurrent of unease. It was subtle at first, a passive-aggressive comment here, a glance there. I could sense it most when dealing with the HOA. Karen, the one everyone avoided, Margaret Clark. She had lived across the street from us for years, and at first we thought she was just one of those overly involved neighbors, the kind who never stopped talking about the rules and regulations. But it quickly became clear that she was more than just a stickler for the rules, she was someone who thrived on control. She had that air about her, the kind that made you feel like you were constantly walking on eggshells. It started with small things, little incidents that didn't seem like a big deal. Emily's wheelchair left a mark on the sidewalk once, and the next thing we knew, Margaret was at our door, demanding we fix it immediately. A few weeks later, there was a dispute about a tree in our front yard. Nothing major, but to her it was a violation. She had a way of making us feel as though we were doing something wrong, even when we weren't. And each time, I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a minor annoyance, no big deal. But deep down I knew there was something more to it. The tone of her voice, the way her eyes narrowed when she spoke to Laura, the way Emily seemed to shrink when Margaret came around. It wasn't just the rules she cared about, it was control, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. As I watched my family that evening, my wife lost in her thoughts on the porch, my daughter giggling as she rolled her wheelchair across the grass, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was a feeling that I couldn't quite place, but it was there, gnawing at me. The kind of feeling you get when you're on the edge of a cliff and you know something is about to happen, even if you don't know exactly what. The light breeze that had once felt comforting now felt like a whisper, something just on the edge of hearing, something you can't quite grasp. The street, usually so alive with the hum of neighborhood activity, was eerily silent. No kids playing, no cars driving by. Even the dog had stopped barking. It was as if the world itself had held its breath, waiting for the next moment. And then there was the hour. Midnight. Something about it always felt off. The darkness felt deeper at midnight, more sinister. The time when people's true selves came out. The hour when things could go from calm to chaos in an instant. As I stood there, watching Emily laugh as she tried to catch the neighbor's dog, I couldn't ignore the chill creeping up my spine. I could feel the air changing around me, shifting, thickening. Everything felt suspended in time, as if the night itself was holding its breath, preparing for the storm that was about to break. The feeling grew stronger. Something was about to happen, something that would shatter our peace, change everything, and leave us struggling to pick up the pieces. But what? I didn't know. Not yet. The quiet before the storm had arrived, and I had no idea just how badly it would tear us apart. The moment that should have been nothing more than an ordinary evening took an unexpected turn the instant I heard the tires screech. I remember it clearly. The sound of the car's wheels against the road, sharp and aggressive, cutting through the peaceful night. Laura was still on the porch, flipping through a magazine, and Emily had just finished her playtime with the dog, giggling as she wheeled herself toward the porch steps to sit beside her mother. Everything seemed fine until the screeching tires stopped just a few feet from our driveway. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a voice, a shrill, high-pitched, and unmistakable. It was Margaret Clark, of course. I could always spot that voice a mile away. It had an edge to it that grated against every fiber of my being. She was standing outside her house, arms crossed, glaring at us with a look that sent a shiver down my spine. The light from the porch cast shadows that made her face look even more menacing. "You've got to be kidding me," Laura muttered under her breath, not even bothering to hide her annoyance. She was used to Margaret's drama, but this time it was different. I could see it in her face. Something was off. Margaret had been getting more aggressive with her petty complaints lately, but this felt like something far worse. I stepped outside, the cold evening air biting at my skin. "Margaret, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though there was a growing sense of unease in my chest. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smug smile that I had learned to despise over the years. "There's a problem, John," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You didn't follow the HOA guidelines about the lights on your porch. I gave you plenty of time to fix it, but here we are again, another violation." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. Lights. This was about lights? "Margaret, it's barely been a week since the last complaint, and we already fixed that issue," I replied, holding my ground. "I don't understand why you keep bringing up these ridiculous things." But Margaret wasn't listening. Her face was flushed with a deep, angry red, and her eyes locked onto Emily. "Your daughter doesn't belong here, John," she snapped, her words as venomous as ever. "You think you can just keep her here in that wheelchair and pretend like nothing's wrong? You can't even follow simple rules." I could feel my blood boil. Margaret had always been cruel, but to go after Emily, my little girl, was something I wasn't going to tolerate. Before I could respond, Laura stood up, stepping between me and Margaret, her protective instincts kicking in. "Leave her alone, Margaret," Laura said, her voice low but firm. "Emily has as much right to be here as anyone else. You need to back off." But Margaret wasn't backing off. Her lips twisted into a sneer as she stepped closer to the porch, her eyes now fixed on Laura. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed. "You're nothing but a weak, helpless woman with a disabled daughter. Maybe it's time you learned your place." My heart stopped. I knew what she was implying, and it made my blood run cold. "You don't get to talk to my wife like that," I warned, stepping forward to confront her. But the anger in Margaret's eyes only grew. She was beyond reasoning now. Without warning, she took a step back, reaching into her purse. I didn't understand what was happening at first. Was she reaching for phone? For help? But when she pulled out a gun, my body went cold. My heart skipped a beat as the world seemed to slow down. "Margaret, no!" I shouted, stepping forward, trying to protect Laura, but it was too late. The gunshot rang out, echoing through the night, sharp and terrifying. I heard it in my chest, my ears ringing with the sound, and for a split second, everything froze. Laura gasped, her body jerking back, her eyes wide in shock and pain. I looked down, my hands shaking as I saw the blood soaking through her blouse. My wife, the woman I loved more than anything, had been shot. "Laura!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside her, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. Emily, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, screamed too. The sound of my daughter's terror was more painful than anything I had ever heard. But Margaret wasn't done. She stood there, still holding the gun, her face completely devoid of remorse. She deserved it, she muttered, as if the words meant nothing, as if this was just another petty confrontation. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, but nothing made sense. How had this happened? Why had this happened? The woman I had always seen as an annoyance, an inconvenience at worst, was now the source of this nightmare. I didn't know what to do, only that I had to save Laura. I had to keep her alive no matter what. As I tried to stop the bleeding, Emily was still crying, her sobs ripping through the still night. I looked up at Margaret, my eyes filled with fury. "You're going to pay for this," I snarled, my voice barely a whisper of the rage that had overtaken me. But she didn't even flinch. She just turned and walked away, leaving me there on the porch, my wife in my arms, and my daughter's cries echoing in the background. Everything that had once been normal, peaceful, had been shattered in an instant. The calm was gone, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in my ears, as if it was carved into the very air around me. The world around me felt distorted, like I was trapped in a dream that wasn't mine, one where nothing made sense. Everything slowed down. The moonlight, the blood soaking through Laura's blouse, my trembling hands as I tried to apply pressure to the wound. My wife was in my arms, her face pale and stricken with shock, her breath shallow and uneven. I could hear her gasps, but it felt like I was underwater, drowning in panic and fear. "Stay with me, Laura," I whispered, my voice hoarse as I pressed down harder on the wound. But the blood kept flowing, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to stop it. I could feel the weight of her body growing heavier, the life slowly draining from her. My mind raced with 100 questions, none of which made any sense. How could this happen? Why would she do this? Margaret, the name burned in my chest. The woman I had once thought of as merely an irritant had become a nightmare, one I couldn't escape. And now, she had taken the most precious thing I had, my wife. Emily, still in her wheelchair, had backed up into the corner of the porch, her little hands pressed to her ears as she sobbed. Her body shook with the weight of terror, but she was silent, as if she couldn't understand the horror unfolding in front of her. She couldn't have. She was just a child, my precious little girl, who had already been through so much in her short life. But now, she was witnessing something that would stay with her forever. I wanted to shield her from this, to take away the pain, to make it all go away. But I couldn't. The helplessness felt like a physical weight on my chest, suffocating me. I turned back to Laura, my heart pounding in my throat. "Laura, please just hold on. I need you to hold on," I whispered, my voice breaking. Her eyes flickered, trying to focus on me, but there was a vacancy to her gaze. She was slipping away. I could feel it in the way her body felt limp in my arms, like she was already far away, drifting into the darkness. "Please, Laura, don't leave me," I choked out, desperate as I glanced frantically around, wondering where the hell help was. But it felt like the world had gone silent. The neighborhood we once knew, so well now a foreign place, empty and cold. Everything about that moment felt wrong. The night, the sky, even the air was all wrong. I could still see Margaret in my mind walking away, as if she hadn't just destroyed everything that mattered to me. Her words replayed in my mind over and over, her cold, heartless declaration. She deserved it. I couldn't believe it. My hands were shaking, not just from fear, but from rage. How could anyone, let alone a neighbor, do this? But she wasn't just any neighbor. She was a monster, a person who reveled in control, in making others feel small and weak. And now, she had taken it too far. I wouldn't let this go. I couldn't. As I fought to keep Laura conscious, Emily's cries reached my ears, piercing and raw. My heart broke for her, knowing that she had no idea what was happening, no understanding of the horror her innocent world had just been plunged into. I reached out trying to calm her, but she was beyond calming. She needed me to be strong. She needed me to fight. Help is coming, I said, even though I didn't know if it was true. I didn't even know if I could get Laura the help she needed in time. But I had to say it. For Emily. For myself. My eyes stayed locked on Laura's face, her breathing growing more shallow. Just hold on. Please, just hold on. I begged, my voice trembling with panic and desperation. But Margaret wasn't done. I couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman who had just changed everything with a single pull of the trigger. What kind of person does that? What kind of person shoots someone without hesitation, without remorse? I couldn't get the image of her cold, expressionless face out of my mind. The smugness, the certainty in her eyes, as if she had already won. I could still see her in my mind's eye, standing there, holding that gun. There was no guilt, no regret, just a twisted satisfaction, as if this was some sort of sick game to her. The kind of woman who would go to such extremes for control, what kind of power did she think she had over us? I wasn't sure, but one thing was for certain. Margaret Clark had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. My hands continued to press against Laura's wound, but it was clear to me now nothing could stop what had already been set into motion. The first shot had been fired, and it was only the beginning of a nightmare. I didn't know if I could survive. I needed answers. I needed to make her pay for what she'd done. But all I had was my wife's life slipping away in my arms and my daughter trembling, helpless beside us, and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The world felt like it was closing in on me, pressing in from all sides. The hospital lights were too bright, the antiseptic smell too strong. My hands were still shaking, covered in Laura's blood, as I stood in the sterile, lifeless waiting room. Emily was beside me, her small, fragile hand gripping mine as if she were trying to hold onto some semblance of normalcy in this nightmare. But nothing was normal. Nothing could ever be normal again. Laura had been rushed into surgery, the doctors working desperately to save her life, but there was a hollow feeling inside me, a cold emptiness that no amount of hope could fill. Every moment spent in that waiting room felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch and bend, taunting me with its unrelenting pace, while I sat there watching my daughter's face crumble under the weight of it all. She had always been so strong, but this was different. This wasn't something you could fight through with a smile or a brave face. It was a war, and Margaret had started it. I could feel the rage building inside me, coiling tighter with each passing second. I wanted to see Margaret. I wanted to make her understand the pain she had caused. The thought of her, walking away unfazed as if what she had done didn't matter, made my blood boil. She had shot Laura, not just physically, but emotionally, ripping through everything that I held dear. The family I had fought so hard to protect, the life we had built. And now I had to sit here helpless, waiting for a doctor to come and tell me if my wife would survive. But I couldn't let go of the image of Margaret. I couldn't shake it. Her face twisted with malice, the satisfaction in her eyes as she pulled the trigger. The way she stood there afterward, almost admiring her handiwork, as if this was a game to her. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even sorry. She was cold, cold to the point of cruelty. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself questioning everything I had ever known about her. The petty complaints, the power plays, the passive-aggressive comments. I had thought they were just annoyances, things I could brush off and forget. But now, in the wake of what she had done, I realized that this was not just about some minor violations or power struggles. It never had been. This was something much darker. Margaret wasn't just a neighbor. She was a predator, and I had been blind to it. I remembered the time when she had first approached us about Emily's wheelchair, claiming that it was an eyesore for the neighborhood. How she had insisted that we put up a barrier to hide it from view. We had laughed it off, thinking it was just her being overbearing, but now it felt like a warning that I had ignored. And it sickened me. How many times had she looked at us, at Emily, and thought she was above us? How many times had I let her cross the line, telling myself that it was just her being difficult? But she hadn't been difficult. She had been dangerous. Suddenly, the door to the waiting room opened, and a nurse stepped inside, her face a mask of professionalism. But even she couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. "Mr. Clark, your wife is stable for now. We've managed to stop the bleeding, but the next few hours are critical. Stable. For now." The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't bring me comfort. How could they? Laura's life hung by a thread, and I knew there was a chance we might lose her. I wasn't ready to accept that. Not now. Not ever. But as I tried to focus on the nurse's words, the image of Margaret returned, even stronger than before. I had to make her pay. I had to make her understand what she had done, what it meant to take someone's life and destroy everything they held dear. I couldn't just let this go. I wouldn't. A fire had been lit inside me, one that would burn until I saw justice. I would find a way to make her suffer, like she made us suffer. She didn't deserve to walk free. She didn't deserve to live in the same world as us after what she had done. As the nurse left and I sat back down beside Emily, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for Laura anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter's future. I was fighting for every single person who had ever been bullied, oppressed, or crushed under the weight of someone else's cruelty. Margaret had crossed a line that no one should ever cross, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. I looked at Emily, her face tear-streaked, and I made a vow in that moment, a vow that would guide me through the coming storm. No matter what it took, no matter how far I had to go, I would make sure that Margaret Clark paid for what she had done to our family. And if the system failed us, if the law couldn't protect us, I would find another way. A way that would make her understand that there are consequences for actions like hers. But I also knew something deeper, something I couldn't shake. Margaret wasn't just a woman who made bad decisions. She was something far worse. She was a force of nature, a storm that had been brewing for years, and now it had finally broken. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The game had just begun. And I was going to win. I would make sure of it. The hours in the waiting room dragged on like days, each tick of the clock amplifying the silence that enveloped us. The sterile walls, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the endless hum of the hospital machines created a world that felt detached from reality. It was a place where time didn't matter, where time was irrelevant. And yet, all I could think about was how much time we had lost, how much time Laura had already lost, and how much more we had left to salvage. Emily had fallen silent. Her tears had long since dried. But the look in her eyes, empty, lost, and confused, was the hardest thing I had ever witnessed. She had always been the light of our home, the smile on our faces, the joy in our lives. But now she was just empty, staring at the walls, clutching her stuffed animal, as if the world had spun out of control and she had no idea how to grab hold of it again. I couldn't blame her. I didn't know how to hold on to anything either. The reality of the situation had settled in like a weight on my chest. Laura was alive. Yes, but her survival wasn't guaranteed. The bullet had hit her in a critical area, and the doctors weren't giving me much to hold on to. Stable for now had become my new reality, a phrase I repeated to myself as if it were a prayer. But what did stable mean? How long could she stay that way? Would she wake up? And if she did, would she be the same? I couldn't face the possibility that she might not be. I wouldn't. I paced the waiting room in an attempt to burn off the rage that was still simmering just below the surface. My mind kept flashing back to that moment when Margaret had pulled the trigger. The look on her face, the smirk, it was so chilling, so cold, that I could almost feel it burning my skin. She didn't just shoot my wife. She had done it with such casual indifference, as if it were nothing more than a passing annoyance she decided to get rid of. And her words, she deserved it. Those words still echoed in my head, replaying over and over again like some sick chant. I wanted to tear into her. I wanted to find her, to make her feel the same fear, the same pain that we were all feeling right now. But I knew better. I knew that anger alone wouldn't be enough. As much as I wanted to charge into her house, drag her out by her hair, and make her pay for what she had done, I had to stay focused. I had to think about the bigger picture, about what mattered most, Laura and Emily, but in that moment, all I could think about was how to make Margaret suffer. How to make her understand that what she had done was unforgivable. I couldn't let her get away with it. No, no one gets away with something like that. Not after the damage she had done to my family. I turned back to Emily, her face still lifeless, and I knelt beside her. Hey, kiddo, I said softly, trying to inject some warmth into my voice. Your mom's going to be okay. She's strong just like you. Emily didn't respond. She didn't even look at me. She just stared ahead, her gaze vacant. My heart ached as I reached for her hand. We'll get through this together, okay? I said, squeezing her hand gently, but there was no response. I could tell she wasn't listening to me. Her mind was somewhere else, probably in that same place I was. Somewhere between hope and despair, stuck in limbo, waiting for answers that might never come. I ran a hand through my hair and stood up, my movements stiff. The need for action was overwhelming, but I couldn't act on my own. I needed the law. I needed evidence. I needed something that would make Margaret pay for what she had done. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how hard it would be. We had no witnesses. No one had seen her pull the trigger. She would deny it. She would lie. And worse, she would probably get away with it. In the world of HOAs and petty power struggles, people like Margaret had a way of getting what they wanted, no matter the cost. She would spin her version of the story, play the victim, and I would be left trying to prove the impossible. It was infuriating. The system, the law, it didn't always work the way it should. Justice wasn't always served in the courtroom, and I knew that all too well. There was no guarantee that this would end with her behind bars. No guarantee that she would face the consequences of her actions. But I couldn't just sit here and wait for some miracle. I had to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to let this woman destroy my family and walk away without facing some kind of punishment. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. I had no evidence, no real way to prove what had happened. But there had to be something I could use to bring Margaret to justice. I just had to think. I had to be smart. I looked down at Emily again, my heart sinking as I realized how much she had lost, how much we all had lost. The smile that once lived on her face was now absent, replaced by a fear that I couldn't fix with just a few words. The innocent life she had once known was now tainted by violence. And it was my job, no, my responsibility, to fix it, to protect my family. The nurse had told me that Laura was stable for now, but I couldn't shake the dread that lingered. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, and while I waited for the outcome, I was already making my plan. I couldn't just sit here. I wouldn't. I had to make Margaret pay, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that she did. For Laura, for Emily, for our family. I had always believed in the system. I had always thought that if you followed the rules, worked hard, and did what was right, justice would prevail. But the more I sat there in the sterile hospital room, the more I realized that belief was naive. Justice wasn't something that just appeared because you wished for it. Justice had to be fought for. It had to be dragged out of the system, and even then, it didn't always arrive. I wasn't going to wait for some law enforcement official to knock on my door with a silver platter of justice. That was a fairy tale. In the real world, I had to take matters into my own hands. Margaret Clark had shot my wife in cold blood, and she would not walk free because of some legal loophole or lack of evidence. I was done waiting. The first step was making sure Laura was okay. The second was figuring out how to make Margaret pay for what she had done. But there was one problem. I had nothing. No witnesses. No video footage. No clear evidence linking her to the crime. All I had was my word. And in a case like this, that wasn't enough. Everyone knew what kind of woman Margaret was. She was the type to hide behind a mask of politeness, using the law to get what she wanted, all while manipulating the system to serve her. And I couldn't allow that to continue. I wouldn't allow her to twist this into something that benefited her. I leaned forward in the waiting room, my hands clenched into fists on my lap, my mind racing with possibilities. My first instinct was to confront her, drag her into the street, and demand she take responsibility for what she had done. But I knew that wouldn't work. She would deny everything. She'd claim she was defending herself, that we were the ones who provoked her. I could already hear the words coming out of her mouth, the way she'd twist the truth until it was unrecognizable. No, I needed evidence. I needed a way to prove she had shot Laura, to make sure she couldn't lie her way out of this. But how? I thought back to everything that had happened in the hours before the shooting. The way Margaret had approached us about the lights, about Emily, the strange tension in the air. The way she had acted like she owned the place, like she could dictate the terms of our lives. That wasn't just a coincidence. Margaret had been planning this. She had been building up to it, pushing us to the brink, waiting for the right moment to strike. But why? What had driven her to pull that trigger? Was it just the need to control us? Or was there something deeper? Something more sinister? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching, followed by the nurse re-entering the room. Her face was soft, sympathetic, but there was something in her eyes that told me the news she had was not good. She paused at the door, as if she was trying to find the right words, and then she spoke. "Mr. Clark," she said gently, "we've done everything we can for your wife. She's stable, but the next few hours will be critical. We need to keep monitoring her closely. There's a possibility that the bullet damaged some vital organs, and we won't know the full extent of the damage until the swelling goes down." I felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. "What are the chances?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The nurse hesitated, then answered carefully. "We're doing everything we can, but it's too soon to say. We'll know more in the morning." I nodded numbly. The uncertainty was killing me. I wanted answers. I needed something to hold on to, but the nurse's words were all I had. "Thank you," I said, even though I wasn't sure what I was thanking her for. There was nothing she could do to ease the gnawing pain in my chest. She gave me a sympathetic look before walking out, leaving me with my thoughts and the empty silence of the room. But I wasn't truly alone. Margaret was there with me, haunting me. Her face, her smirk, the words she had spoken as she walked away, those things were more present than the four walls around me. I knew what I had to do. The law was going to be slow, if not entirely useless. I couldn't wait for the system to catch up with Margaret. She would slip through the cracks if I did. I needed to get creative. I needed to turn this situation into something that could bring her down. But how? I remembered the neighbors. Some of them had been there when the shooting happened. Some might have seen something, heard something, anything that could help me. I hadn't given them much thought before. I had been too focused on getting Laura to the hospital, but now I knew that the key to bringing Margaret down was in those neighbors. I would talk to them. I would find out who had seen what. I would talk to anyone who had even the smallest piece of information, no matter how insignificant it seemed. If they saw anything at all, I would use it to make sure Margaret paid. I looked at Emily again, still sitting quietly in the corner, her face hollow with confusion and fear. She needed her mother. She needed us to be strong. I couldn't afford to break down now. I had to be the rock, the one who would keep our family intact no matter how hard things got. And I would stop at nothing to make Margaret face the consequences of her actions. The wheels in my mind were turning faster now. The pieces were falling into place. I had a plan, and nothing, no matter how dangerous, was going to stand in my way. Margaret Clark was going to regret the day she decided to come after my family. The tension had been building for days, an unstoppable wave crashing closer with each passing moment. My mind raced as I prepared myself for what was coming. The conversations with the neighbors had given me just enough to work with, enough to start piecing together a picture of the events that had unfolded that night. Small details, whispers of movement, the angle of Margaret's stance, a glimpse of the gun she had hidden under her jacket. Nothing concrete enough to make the police move, but enough to build a case, enough to make Margaret's world shake. But it wasn't going to be enough to just go through the legal system. I had learned quickly that Margaret was not the kind of woman who could be dealt with easily. She thrived on intimidation, on control, on bending the system to her will. If I went to the police with what I had now, I was certain they'd dismiss it. She'd be back to her old tricks within a matter of days. No, I had to do something more, something that would break her, something that would make her realize that no one could get away with what she had done to my family. I hadn't seen her since the night she shot Laura. I'd spent every waking moment in the hospital going over the details, piecing together everything I could about that night. And now it was time to confront her, to make her face what she had done. I stood in front of my front door, my heart pounding. It was late, but I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I was afraid of letting her walk away, afraid of what would happen if I didn't do something about it. I hadn't told Emily I was leaving. I couldn't bear to see the look in her eyes when I told her I was going after Margaret. But she was still asleep, curled up on the couch, her little body wrapped in the warmth of the blanket I'd draped over her. She deserved more than this nightmare. She deserved a world where people like Margaret didn't exist. I grabbed the keys to my truck, and for the first time in days, I walked out of the house with purpose. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. Every step felt like I was walking through a fog, unsure of what awaited me, unsure of what kind of monster I was about to face. As I approached Margaret's house, I saw her silhouette through the window, standing in front of her door, her posture rigid, like she was waiting for something, waiting for me. I had no doubt that she knew I was coming. She had to. She was never far from the drama in the neighborhood, and she had a way of keeping tabs on everyone. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, the anger, the fear, all mixed together. I was shaking, but not from fear, from the weight of what I was about to do. I rang the doorbell. Her face appeared in the window a moment later, and I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. For a brief second, I thought she might back off, maybe pretend to be surprised, but she didn't. She just opened the door, slowly, methodically, as if this moment had been planned long ago. "John," she said, her voice as icy as I remembered it, her eyes calculating. "What are you doing here?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. Words didn't matter anymore. Not with her. Not after what she'd done. I stepped forward, close enough to feel her breath, to smell the faint scent of her perfume, mixed with the unmistakable sting of alcohol on her breath. "What do you want?" She asked again, this time with a hint of annoyance. But there was something deeper there. Something darker. I took a deep breath. "You know what I want, Margaret." She smiled. The kind of smile that made your skin crawl. "I know you're angry. I know you think you've been wronged. But you need to understand something, John. It was never personal." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. Not personal? She had shot my wife, the mother of my child. She had torn my life apart. And now she stood there, acting as though none of it mattered. "It's over, Margaret. You need to pay for what you did." I said, my voice trembling with rage, but still I held back. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. "Not yet. Pay." She laughed, the sound hollow and menacing. "You think you can threaten me? Do you honestly think anything you do is going to matter? People like you, people like your family, you don't matter. I've been running this neighborhood for years, John. You're just a blip. You think this little stunt is going to change anything?" Her words stung, but I refused to let her see how much they affected me. I was done letting her control me. Done with her games. This was my moment. I had waited too long, and I wasn't walking away until I got what I came for. "You're wrong," I said, my voice low and steady now. "You will pay, and I'll make sure of it." She took a step back, raising an eyebrow as if she couldn't decide whether to laugh or be annoyed. "You really think you can do anything about it? What? You think some pathetic threats will change anything? You think you have enough evidence? Enough support?" She was mocking me. I could hear it in her voice, in the way she carried herself. But it was a mistake. She underestimated me, underestimated the fire I had burning inside me. "I don't need evidence. I don't need anyone's approval. You've already shown your true colors, Margaret, and now I'm going to make sure everyone else knows what you really are." I stepped closer to her, just enough to make her feel the weight of my words. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? But I'm not letting you. Margaret's eyes flashed with something anger, fear, maybe both, but she didn't move. She didn't back away. And I didn't care. For the first time, she looked uncertain. For the first time, she realized that the walls she had built around herself, around her power, were starting to crumble. And that, to me, was enough. I wasn't going to let her destroy us any longer. The game was over. The moment I turned and walked away from Margaret's house, I knew the fight wasn't over, but something had shifted. A weight had been lifted, a crack had formed in the wall she had built around herself. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without that crushing fear in my chest. It wasn't about what had happened in her home, though. It wasn't about the confrontation, the harsh words, or the threats. What mattered most was that I had taken control of my own story. Margaret had tried to tear apart my family, tried to destroy the very core of who we were. But in that moment, I realized that I was still standing, and so was my family. And that gave me a sense of purpose, a fire that would push me forward no matter what happened next. When I got back to the hospital, I found Emily still curled up on the couch in the waiting room, asleep for the first time in days. Her exhaustion was evident, but it wasn't just from the trauma of what had happened. It was the emotional toll of living in uncertainty. I stood there for a moment, watching her, knowing that no matter how much I tried to shield her, the scars of this would stay with her forever. I reached down, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, careful not to wake her. My heart broke as I thought of all she had been through, the fear in her eyes when she heard the shot, the confusion as she watched her mother fall, and the helplessness of not knowing what would come next. But I had to believe that we would get through this. We had to, for her sake and for Laura's. The doctors had come back with some good news. Laura was still in critical condition, but she was stable. The bullet hadn't caused irreparable damage, and while the road to recovery would be long, she had a chance. A real chance. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of hope. I sat beside Emily and ran my hand through her hair, trying to reassure myself as much as I was reassuring her. We would make it through. Laura would wake up, and we would rebuild our lives. No matter how many times Margaret tried to break us, we would rise again. But as much as I tried to focus on the positive, the memories of what Margaret had done haunted me. I couldn't forget the coldness in her eyes when she shot Laura, the smirk that twisted her face as if she had just won some sick game. Margaret Clark wasn't just a woman who had made a mistake. She was a predator, and I couldn't let her get away with it. Not now. Not ever. The next few days were a blur. Laura's condition remained touch and go, but she was improving slowly. Every moment I spent by her side was a reminder of how fragile life was. I couldn't afford to take it for granted anymore. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Because I knew this fight wasn't over. Margaret would come for me. She would try to tear down everything I had left, but I had a plan. And I wasn't going to stop until she paid for what she had done. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure of dealing with Margaret's twisted influence on the neighborhood began to mount. There were whispers in the community. Some people supported us. Others still rallied behind her, blinded by the years of manipulation she had expertly crafted. I knew it would take time, but I would expose her for who she truly was. I hired a lawyer, someone who wasn't afraid to take on a case like this. Together, we started building a case. We gathered witness statements from the neighbors who had seen her and heard her that night. We uncovered every detail, her history of complaints, the incidents where she had tried to control others, all the little things that added up to something much larger. We would break her. We would make sure she faced the consequences of what she'd done. But it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about punishing her for the pain she caused. It was about making sure she would never hurt anyone again. Months passed, and slowly Laura began to heal. The emotional scars, though, would take longer. They would take a lifetime. But we were together, and that was enough. We had survived the storm. And though we still had a long way to go, we had each other. That was the only thing that mattered. The day we stood in court, the tension was palpable. It was a long, grueling fight, But we finally had Margaret where we wanted her. Every lie she had told, every detail she had tried to bury, came to light, and when the judge finally rendered his verdict, the satisfaction of seeing Margaret finally pay for what she had done was overwhelming. It wasn't just a win for us, it was a win for everyone who had ever been crushed by someone like her. Margaret was convicted, and the sentence was harsh. She had thought she could get away with destroying my family. But I had shown her that there were consequences for people like her. That night, when I stood before her, I had taken back the power she had tried so hard to steal from me. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I knew that we were free. Free from her, free from the nightmare she had brought into our lives. We could finally begin to rebuild. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Laura by my side, with Emily we would heal, and no one would ever tear our family apart again.